fashionable day.
Got one of Armando's pieces behind us, and we're streaming from onward, so it's a really cool space.
Cool. Is Armando joining?
Yeah, so the back portion of our session, I think they're just going to jump into these chairs and make it super simple.
Okay, cool. So they're with you guys, right?
What's that?
They're with you?
Yep, yeah.
Okay, cool. Are you going to like, when you guys are done, are you going to just go ahead and like, do you want to intro the like kind of second part of it, or?
Yeah, I think Tim will work on his like host skills and see if he can do a great segue into the next session. So
yeah.
Without further ado. Yeah.
Well, happy Startup Week. Thanks
okay, right now I'm gonna make you guys hosts.
So
our co-hosts.
the entire video is in advance now.
Yeah.
And right now we are streaming to YouTube. Okay. And it's, oh, we have 2 minutes. Any questions?
So I don't think so. Will you guys just give us a go after the sponsor video runs, or do you give us a cue?
Brian's gonna do an introduction. And I'm gonna go dark as far as my video. They can't see you, but we're not on mute yet.
Hi, Denver Startup Week. I'm Eric Matisik, President and CEO of Highwing and co-founder of Denver Startup Week. Denver Startup Week is the largest free entrepreneurial event in the world, and it's only possible thanks to the support of our awesome sponsors. We have nearly 40 sponsor companies who contribute to make DSW a reality. Let's show our love for these companies today and all week long. Thanks to our title sponsors, the Downtown Denver Partnership, JP Morgan Chase, Prologis, and Zero, and our track sponsors who help make the great content you're hearing today possible. Battery 621 and Public Works, Capital One Cafe, Colorado Lending Source, Friday Health, Quizlet, Exactly, Zayo, and Zestful. Our headline and event sponsors are bringing you inspiration from around the country. Thank you to Wix, Kinzon, MAPR Agency, Obsidian HR, Kickstart Fund, Promontory Mortgage, Molson Coors, and Comcast. Finally, thank you to our partner and member sponsors listed on the screen. Thank you for your support of Denver Startup Week. Now, let's get started.
The Public Works is a Denver, Colorado-based design, fabrication, and multimedia marketing firm that allows your company to craft an authentic presence to your target audience. For the past 15 years, the Public Works media team has been telling stories with words, pictures, and films. Our unique approach to brand storytelling allows us to get strong reactions and results from our content. We work in experienced and nimble teams with our crew of producers, directors, and cinematographers that all have first-hand experience and international presence. We are fortunate to have amazing clients that allow us to get wherever we need to go with the right tools for the highest production value. Lots of people can take a pretty picture. Just look at Instagram. While we believe our images speak for themselves, what really sets us apart is our decades of experience, our network, and our ability to make shit happen when it counts. We love bringing unexpected partners together to create added value for everyone. And most of all, we love when we finish a job confident that we've not only executed, but elevated the end product, and we know that everyone involved enjoyed the process. Our company was founded on the idea that life is about learning and teaching through every experience. We apply a strict discipline of work hard, play hard, and make great fucking work. We amplify awesome. We surround ourselves with the best and feed off of infectious innovation, ideas, collaboration, and building long-term friendships and partnerships. Contact us anytime for a meeting at our office, golf course, or on the chairlift.
Red leather, yellow leather.
Red leather,
yellow
leather.
leather.
That's our warm-up.
Yeah. Are we on?
Sounds like
Okay, we go. Okay. Hey, everyone. Welcome to Denver Startup Week. I'm Castle.
And I'm Brian.
We're the design track chairs, and we wear matching outfits.
We do.
Yes. Okay, welcome to Startup Week, the first virtual/global Startup Week. Really want to thank our track sponsor, especially, which is the Public Works. They do awesome stuff in our city and beyond. Fabrication, video. They have got a live setup down here filming sessions at Startup Week, and we love them. Thanks to all our sponsors, because this wouldn't happen without them. A few housekeeping things. Let's see. At Denver Startup Week, we strive to make all of our sessions a space where attendees can connect, learn, grow, regardless of gender identity, gender expression, race, ability, sexual orientation, combination of those identities. This is really important to us, that this is a safe space for everyone and that everyone is represented as well. There's something for everyone at Denver Startup Week. And let's see, what else? Brian's going to introduce the session. Up next, we have a session at 1 o'clock on racial equity and impact investing. You should definitely check that out and check out the Designer Track Clubhouse. Hashtag your experience, hashtag Den Startup Week, hashtag Designer Track.
Yeah. Well, we're so excited to be hosting this this session. You know, for the Designer Track, we really try to think about, like, how do we support entrepreneurship in the creative economy? And this particular session is really all about that. And then also really kind of thinking about how do we reimagine spaces to support the new type of work that we're going to be doing. And I think if anything, really with 2020, it's been an acceleration of really kind of thinking about what's next, and then also putting a spotlight on maybe what wasn't working in the past. So this session is very timely, and we're very excited about it. So I'll go ahead and turn it over to Tim and Jason to kick off part one.
Thank you, Brian. Welcome everyone to this morning's panel, Commercial Real Estate and the New Gig Economy. My name is Tim Sack. I'm a designer and placemaker. I've been working in creative placemaking for 5 or 6 years now. We're joined with Jason Shepard, who is the founder of Reactive, a local startup in the commercial real estate space in Denver. Welcome, Jason. Thank you. Well, to kick us off, why don't you tell us a little bit about your background and how you found a way to start Reactive?
Yeah, so I'm a real estate investor first and foremost, and you know, a lot of times real estate doesn't come with a really creative outlet. And over the course of the last 12 years, we not only invested in real estate, but we actually started service-based businesses. So we started a brokerage called ALEXIS Real Estate Group and some ancillary service-based businesses to help people be investors of real estate. Beyond that, I actually co-founded Archipelago, which is how do we actually create community in these physical spaces. So that's a social community that's based here in Denver. There's like a few hundred members. And then more recently is Reactive. And Reactive is how do we optimize commercial real estate? And you know, as a real estate investor, I understand that there's pain points when you have vacancy in your commercial assets. I also realize as an entrepreneur that there's a lot of opportunity and there's a lot of people that want access to commercial real estate. So Reactive starts to bridge that gap by optimizing vacant real estate and then allowing commercial tenants access to that space.
Would you say your experience as an investor really led you into seeing the value that Reactive created?
Yeah, I mean, it's always helpful as an entrepreneur when you're solving your own problem. And so as a real estate investor, I have the problem of vacancy all the time. And also as an entrepreneur, we're always looking ways to additionally monetize our venues and our businesses. So there's a perfect kind of convergence between the two.
Great. We've heard a lot about the gig economy. What is it and where did that come from, or what is it in our vocabulary?
Yeah, so probably 2008. So a lot of times we realize that innovation happens in a downturn. And 2008 was the housing collapse and economic collapse that really started forcing people to be a little more creative with their time and with their spaces. So we saw Airbnb and Uber and a lot of these kind of gig economy platforms take place because people were finding ways to say, I want to monetize my additional bedrooms. I want to monetize my time in my car, and how do I do that? And so these gig economies kind of popped up for people to establish some sort of side hustle to generate additional revenue.
Tell us more about what you mean when you say that commercial real estate is the new gig economy. I understand how it works within the Airbnb cycle and within Uber and TaskRabbit and some of those products, but how do you see it commercial real estate being the kind of new frontier?
So what's interesting with the new frontier of commercial real estate is we're in a really unique time, and you know, this isn't just a byproduct of COVID having downward pressure on commercial real estate. This is a decade of price appreciation for rents. This is property taxes going through the roof over the course of the last 5 years, all of which have applied pressure to entrepreneurs that are in physical spaces. So even e-commerce disrupting retail. So if you kind of look at where we sit in the ecosystem for commercial real estate, there's a lot of people that need to start being pretty creative with how they optimize their spaces. And, you know, we're probably in the first inning of realizing kind of that downward pressure. So with that downward pressure and a lot of that vacancy comes an opportunity to be super, super creative and layer use and really give people access to these spaces.
How do you see that placemaking is going to harness that new opportunity for creativity in the space?
Hey, can you guys speak up a little more, especially Tim?
Yes, of course.
Okay.
The last question was just, how do you see placemaking solving that creative opportunity that's in the vacancy and downward pressure from the commercial real estate space?
So what's interesting about this is as a landlord, I want to keep my place as vibrant as possible and I want to monetize the space. So as we start looking at real estate and understanding that there's an opportunity in this vacancy, we'll start ushering in a new renter pool. And that renter pool is people that really haven't had an opportunity to sign a 5-year lease personally guaranteed. And frankly, that's just super restrictive for most creatives, artists, entrepreneurs. And if you actually look at just how some of these neighborhoods can be around here, if you look at Brooklyn, if you look at Rhino, where we're sitting today, a lot of this was created because the property value was low on entry point, and it allowed the artists, the cafe owners, the entrepreneurs to pop up the one-of-one location. And then over a 5 or 10 year period, it gets really popular, and then you see a Chipotle and a Lululemon on every block. So what happens in a downturn with commercial real estate is it's going to allow for a bit of this innovation. And it gives, you know, landlords that customarily would have all of the, pretty much all the terms and all the control over a real estate deal. Well, they're coming back to the table and saying, I need to be a little more collaborative. Over the next 5 years, I'm going to have a bunch of vacancy. My vacancy is going to impact the other properties that are adjacent to me. So how can I keep the place as vibrant and interesting and really allow people to kind of launch their dreams? So because of what we see happening in commercial real estate, it's going to give a spark to creativity to kind of enter that space and entrepreneurs to enter that space and start adding value.
Talk to me more about placemaking and how placemaking itself is that new gig and solve potentially for that kind of creative opportunity.
Yeah, so placemaking is like one of those buzzwords that just gets thrown around a lot recently, and you know, and also space as a service, but the two are pretty parallel. So I mean, a good example that everyone knows of placemaking is essentially WeWork. So WeWork goes to a landlord. They say, you know, I know you're asking $25 a square foot. We'll pay you your $25 a square foot. We'll make this space super cool. We'll make it flexible. We'll put kombucha on top or whatever we're going to do to create space. Yeah. And then we're going to charge the consumer out $70 to $80 a square foot. So there's essentially an arbitrage business on how do I take this space, make it interesting, make it flexible, and charge a premium for making it flexible. And so WeWork's been a great example of that. I mean, frankly, we did it in our own portfolio. We had, you know, our service-based real estate business that really only operates out of our office for 40 hours a day. So my business partner and I said, why would we have, you know, a multi-million-dollar asset that sits here, you know, only occupied 40 out of 168 hours? And so we actually rented out to a social community that activated the nights and the weekends. And for us, that's the perfect example of placemaking. I'm already a user in the space. How can I now additionally monetize the space? How can I actually use that, those amenities and the excess hours or the excess square footage to add revenue?
So the opportunity for the modern placemaker is to come into a vacant space, create vibrancy, create something that the community could use, and then resell it essentially to the marketplace. Bring the value of that property up so that they have a margin essentially between what that base rent is and what they're able to charge to others that are using the space.
Totally. And I think there's two routes to this, right? So there's the route that's an existing user of space and a tenant of space. So we have this as an example on Reactive, where we have a coffee shop that's only open from 6 a.m. to 3 p.m. in the heart of Lodi. I mean, that's really expensive real estate. For them to be able to monetize that as an event space, as a meetup space, as a commissary kitchen in the evenings, I mean, those are great potential for them to be an in-house placemaker because they're already in the space and they're looking for ways to generate additional revenue, obviously. The other way is, like you mentioned, how do I actually take a venue that's sitting vacant and tell the landlord, hey, I'm going to add value to the neighborhood. I'm going to add value to your space by making it vibrant and by bringing in commerce and community into the space. So for them to say, hey, I'm going to go on a short-term lease for 6 months while you're trying to figure out your long-term tenancy, because as a landlord, it takes 9 months to a year to find a long-term tenant. So in that interim period, how can I go in there as an artist, a creative, an entrepreneur and say, I just want to try it before I buy it. I don't want to sign the 5-year lease personally guaranteed. So how do I go into the space, use it for my primary need, and then monetize it for anyone else that has interest in activating the space?
You touched on the landlord there. You know, I'm very curious to understand, you know, how does this overall impact in the big picture of the landlord and the actual property owners of these spaces as they're becoming stressed in the market?
Yeah, so like I mentioned, I mean, I'm a use case on both sides of this marketplace and this problem. And essentially from a landlord's perspective, I mean, vacancy is your biggest expense when you own a piece of real estate. It's also probably your highest liability as far as property preservation. Most of the properties that you see that are getting vandalized, the times that we go into winters and pipes freeze, I mean, if you don't have someone in the space caring for the space, it's actually a bigger liability for a landlord. And then when we were doing this and we're activating some of our own spaces, we were realizing that it's helpful for our marketing for a long-term tenant to have more people walking through the space, people connecting to the space, people telling their friends about the space. So not only was it an opportunity for us to generate additional revenue, it helped for property preservation, and really it was a catalyst to help us find a long-term tenant way quicker than we would in traditional means.
We touched on it a little bit before, but it seems also that by bringing that vibrancy into those spaces, like you mentioned with Rhino, you got people to come into a market that wasn't involved and you're able to bring it up, which essentially as a property owner creates enormous value. Okay, we have a property ownership in a space that's not vibrant. We now allow this opportunity to happen, which now, I have a legal limit instead of a creative placemaker, and that creative placemaker moves on to the next neighborhood. Yeah. Okay.
Yep. So it's really interesting. Actually, we've found just how much adjacent businesses really impact not only the total community, but the businesses just on that block. So, I've recently chatted with a salon owner that said the coffee shop across the street, they were having a chat, and the coffee shop said, if that salon leaves, that's 60% of my revenue. And I really didn't understand it from how interconnected these businesses are. But they said every single person that gets ready to go get their hair done comes through here and buys the most expensive coffee that we have because they're sitting in a chair for the next 2 hours. And you just don't realize as a community how interconnected real estate is. So for us to allow spaces to always remain vibrant, it's productive for a neighborhood, it's productive for community to find different points of connection, and it's productive to bring artists and entrepreneurs and give them access to these spaces that normally probably are going to be too expensive and too burdensome in traditional jobs.
It's interesting to think of how much impact an adjacent business could do to your own business, where it's benefiting you simply by being open. And that's just a great way to think about this. Yeah. We continue to talk about creativity in this. Can you walk me down your street of the future in the next 5 years? Where are we going with this, and what would a creative place maybe be able to look like?
Yeah, so I think even right now, when times are good here in Denver, I mean, you still see vacancy on every block that you walk through. You still see restaurants or bars that are only open during the morning hours or evening hours. So no matter where you're walking in the city, you're seeing opportunity for it to be a little more vibrant and a little more collective. So if I start looking at what the future looks like, I mean, right now we're sitting in Onward, Denver, which is a really interesting location. This is kind of the space of the future. It's omni-use, so it's a boutique. It's also an event space. It's also an art gallery. I mean, it's getting the maximum use out of square footage in a really interesting neighborhood. So I mean, I've seen it be done on 43rd and Tennyson. There's a beautiful project going on right now. There were 3 homes that were being boarded up for a future redevelopment play. They were in kind of entitlement, and for 6 months, Archipelago went through and they actually created a space that has performing art piece and immersive art. It has projection art. It has a retail location, and it's part of a social community gathering space, outdoor space for small intimate gatherings. So, I'm seeing every block that you walk down having a pop-up retail location or a sound and cacao ceremony for people that just want to walk in. There's no reason that we don't have more access to these spaces, because frankly, it's a win-win-win. It's a win for the consumers that now have access to launch their dreams. It's a win for the landlord, and it's definitely a win for the neighborhood and the community.
So successfully done the for lease sign in the windows and within the past, bringing somebody in there, no matter if it's for a week or for a few months while a longer term tenant comes and finds that space, you can see that that long-term vacancy is hopefully something that we can solve.
Yeah, I think you walk down the street and you're surprised almost every week. Wow, what is this new place? What's going on here? And I think collectively, and this is just like from a greater good for the community, is being inspired and being in awe of other people's projects and their dreams is going to actually add value to the overall community. It will inspire other people to take that risk and say, wow, this is great. They only had to spend $1,000 for a couple of weeks to kind of try out their product or sell their t-shirts or whatever it is. I mean, that's the type of inspiration that will really kind of launch other people and kind of get them into the game, I think.
And how cool for the consumer to be able to be in a space where there's always something new going on, where next to the staples that you want there all the time, there's always something new to discover, so your neighborhood is that new.
Yeah. Yeah, as a landlord, I want a 30-year Walgreens tenant, and then I just never have to like think about them paying rent. But that's just never going to happen. And I realize that there's going to be assets that need to be a little more fluid. So if it's going to be fluid, why shouldn't it be interesting and curated and hosts that kind of step up and find a way to monetize the spaces themselves?
One thing I want to touch on before we close up here is just how do you see regulations really impacting how this works, knowing that there's obviously very strict zoning codes within communities. How does that change as we get creative with those things?
So I think, from a regulatory issue, everyone's really familiar with Airbnb's issues in most municipalities. And that's essentially because you're taking a commercial use, a hotel, and you're putting it in a residential neighborhood which is not zoned for it. And obviously that causes some issues. What I'm looking at is taking commercial use and keeping it commercial use and really adding vibrancy to these vacant commercial spaces. So a little less regulatory issues when it comes to changing the use, but also there is going to have to be a change for like permitted use in spaces. And right now, if you're an office space, you can only really be an office space. If you're an event space, you can really only be an event space. And what we're saying is right now that's burdening a lot of entrepreneurs. If you're trying to make rent, which has been appreciating for the last 5 years, and then you're paying property taxes that get passed levied down to you as the operator, it's not collected at the owner's level. It's getting really expensive to operate. So you need to find ways to allow yourself to monetize space. And to do that, we have to be a little less restrictive on these permitted use. And that's something that hopefully excise and license and public policy will move forward to start realizing that if we really want to allow spaces to be perpetually vibrant, that they're gonna kind of have to walk the lines of part art gallery, part event space, part tattoo parlor. I don't know what the use is, but we definitely are gonna have to find better ways to actually kind of merge those very specific use regulations.
And I feel like we've seen that just through 2020 and COVID. We saw a lot of cities relaxing their period, their to-go cocktail rules. There's a lot of that happened. It's like a necessity for these businesses to be able to survive. So we've seen that, with the demand for it, it does happen with the municipality, and quite quickly. I was really impressed how fast that changed, specifically with, okay, you can drink outside now, you can get to-go drink. Like, that was something that was such a no-no for so long, and then immediately that was able to be something on. So it can be done.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting about that, just to go back to my earlier point, is people start getting really creative, and you start realizing that there's a bunch of rules we're adhering to, or a bunch of regulation that might not be helpful in the process. And when things get a little tougher, you start realizing we have to stop being so burdensome to some of these things. So I think that will continue to be the case. I mean, like I mentioned, the next 3 to 5 years for commercial real estate are not going to look better. And we're in a place that's probably operating better than most cities. I mean, in New York and LA, there's a mass exodus from people that were long-time commercial tenants, property owners. So, this is something that's not, COVID related. This is commercial real estate was kind of on its last legs. And the only way for us to start bringing this back is by taking these vacant spaces and adding that vibrancy and allowing people to be hosts, to be curators, to be placemakers, and find kind of their new role as entrepreneurs.
We have a couple minutes before we pass it over to Alexis and Armando. I just wonder if there's any questions, be able to have time to answer those. We'll grab the comments. See if there's something. If anyone has any questions, feel free to pop them in the chat.
Doesn't look like it. Looks like we should be good, just some sound issues. So.
Great, thank you, Jason. really informative on how things are changing and how it's going to be excitingly more creative. And from my space in the world as a designer and creative, I see a lot of value coming up ahead for us. And as you touched on that, I'm going to hand it over to the other creatives in the room who are going to tell us a little bit more about how they're doing what they do to create a place.
Gentlemen, thank you. Let me clear my throat.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us. Thank you to Brian and Castle for being here with us as well. Armando and I are thrilled to be with you here this morning and to bring in the artist perspective to our topic this morning of Denver Startup Week.
Hey, real quick, you guys, who's ever, Alexis, that chair must be farther from the microphone because we also could not really hear Tim Stack. We need you guys to speak up and enunciate or get the mic, pull the mic closer. So, and I think Brian wants to say a few words about you guys too.
Is that better, Castle? Can you hear us a little bit more?
I can hear you better, yes.
Great, thank you.
We'll jump in if we get any more people saying they can't.
Yes, thank you.
That's great. Well, thank you so much for joining us. And thanks to Jason and Tim for really talking about, just like how exciting times, right, of rethinking kind of like commercial spaces and what's on the inside of buildings. So we're so happy that Armando and Alexis, you're joining us now to really kind of talk about that outside of the buildings and really kind of the public realm and how those two things how they interact with each other. So thank you so much for being here, and we'll turn it over to you.
Great, thank you, Brian. Again, my name is Alexis Newton, and I'm here with the very talented artist, muralist Armando Silva, as well as the beautiful painting that we have behind us done by Armando. In this second session of Denver Startup Week, we want to bring in the artist perspective, and we want to talk about what access looks like in this theme of placemaking. And I think we kind of want to start with that. Armando, as an artist, thinking about the idea of access and for artists and what is needed. What does that mean? And how does access and placemaking relate to the new gig economy?
For sure. So good morning, buenos dias, everybody. My name is Armando Silva. Like I said, I'm a full-time artist and kind of work in the full spectrum of painting, everything from small canvases to murals and some creative kind of consulting and stuff like that. So just the idea of access and what does that mean and participation within communities and space. I would say it starts with something very much like this, to have an opportunity to have a seat at the table, to engage with conversation, dialogue, to have the curtain pulled back, as you might say, with ideas, to be able to just be in the room and get to know Tim and Jason a little bit more and have conversations with Alexis. I think from a creative standpoint, somebody that's not even just a creative because you're an entrepreneur, with you're wearing that hat as well, to be able to have that curtain pulled back and have access to these conversations and how some of the infrastructure looks like as things are being built out or platforms are already being presented. For you to have just a seat at the table, to be able to ask questions, poke at things, be able to just hear people talk about it, maybe be a fly on the wall. Sometimes you might not even have a question or a specific comment, but to be in the room, to have access to the conversation. And I think we want to dissect that a little bit more. But Alexis, I'd appreciate if you told everybody a little bit about your background and how you and I are connected and how we are here at Denver Startup Week.
Yeah, thanks, Armando. We've had the opportunity to work together, Armando and I, on different projects. And the first one came with doing a mural for Frida Kahlo at Museo de las Americas. And as Armando and I were preparing for this, a few of the things that we discussed and how artists come to participate and have a seat at the table really are three things that for us define this. And it was about trust, connection, and respect. Those are the three things that we felt really brought access to these conversations. And I think, Armando, as well, if you can talk a little bit about the ins and outs of building a career as a muralist,
Sure.
and how this has contributed to our community's identity.
For sure. So I think what ends up happening, a little bit of context for me is I'm from Mexico and I'm a kind of a English as a second language. Is there's a lot of these words, right? Even Jason brought up, like there's buzzwords and there's new terminology that kind of gets pushed out with new generations and new ways of doing things and envisioning things. I get a kick out of even just this presentation itself that we were talking about the new gig economy. I was like, wow, is this like about gigabytes, like megabytes? Like, what are we talking about here? So again, that idea of being able to make that connection, to be able to have access to what these words are, what they mean, and how they're transforming to becoming something new. You gain some trust, and then through that, you find a little bit of respect. When people can actually, whether it's kind of coming down to your level or to the side or whichever, we can kind of cross connecting different sectors, different careers, different professions. And like I said, with the new gig economy, is like, oh my God, we're going to talk about iPads and the way the internet's affecting us, but it's legit about what I'm doing as a creative, how I'm working as a freelance artist, and I'm working from gig to gig, how I might be spending a whole month in Denver working on a specific project, and I might need a home base in Denver, or I'm going to be traveling maybe to Mexico. And what does that look like? And I need to have a base there for maybe a few months. Some of these, from the creative standpoint, some of these things might look like residencies, right? And that's a good way to pitch it as you're pursuing gigs and you're establishing trust and making a connection either with a community, a brand, an organization. And through that, you're also working, so if you're working with a brand or an organization, you're working with the community to also earn and gain their respect, whether it's to sell a product or to set up an actual place so you can come in and experience sight, sound, and smell. So all those things are super important and kind of working in tandem. So kind of bringing it back, making it more personal to me on what some of this stuff looks like with placemaking, understanding the language, the lingo, figuring out who you are, your role within those places sometimes can feel very overwhelming as well. So just from the creative standpoint, from that entrepreneur, from that like grassroots, I'm just getting started, and how do I jump into these different platforms and engage and participate, whether that's going to be with a museum that's being revitalized or be, a new creative directors coming in, or this is a new coffee shop that's opening up in town, is how do you yourself as one individual, as one creative, come in and talk about your plan, talk about your ideas, communicate your expression to collaborate within these community platforms, I think is super, super important. And so I just wanted to take a step back and kind of poke fun at myself as far as engaging with these terms, these words, that comes back down to having access again, right? Super, super important for me. I'll hand it back over to you and we can continue talking about and kind of stay on track here.
So I think thinking about the word placemaking and thinking about your role as an artist, Armando, what is an example, or talk to us about one of your recent works when you think of placemaking, or where you've come in to add vibrancy, creativity, color as an artist. Talk to us about that place, that community, the impact that you have.
For sure. And well, I'll kind of give two sides of the coin. So a lot of us might not know how this stuff happens, how all of a sudden we're here in Rhino and all of a sudden crush is happening, and where is this coming from? And I know I might have donated $10 or something like that. And now there's this big project and an artist flew in from LA, but there's also an artist that's getting their first start and their first wall, right? From my standpoint, from my personal experience, the attempt is to always try to build a connection. So whether it's building out a painting like this or designing up a mural for a specific wall, it's to try to be as intentional as you can with it, to ask sometimes hard questions about myself or about the actual space that I'm going into. Am I even the adequate person for the actual job? So I sometimes tend to kind of negotiate myself out of it because I'm not the one that should be doing it, especially right now and with so much social injustice and issues that we're dealing with. specifically at this moment to be able to ask those questions and see how we can come to a more authentic, genuine, local, grassroots effort to bring some of that creativity, because I think that's why people travel into our spaces, or we commute, or we go to the big city, or we might go to Los Angeles or New York just to go get a taste of what's actually there. So with my experience, it's a lot of questions. It's a lot of engaging. It's a lot of asking if the people within that block, within that radius, if they even want something like this to happen. Have we engaged with them? Have we surveyed them? Have we asked if these things are written out in different languages? I know we have a huge Latin or Spanish speaking population here in Colorado. So that's where I find some of my superpowers. We're bringing in some of that, that experience of me being, that I speak Spanish, that I can maybe engage with a different community. So being true to myself, who I am, the experiences that I've gone through, and seeing if they truly fit or mesh well with either the city, the community, the brand, or the business, and to see if those ideas are going to mix well in order to create something that will then be also received well by the community, the client, the audience, for them to then embrace it and find ownership and identity and access points within that creation.
So you talked about building a connection with intentionality.
Yes.
And right now you're doing an incredible mural in, is it Longmont?
Fort Collins.
Fort Collins.
Yeah.
And obviously there you're bringing in the importance or the significance of what it means to be Latino.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk to us a little bit about that project that you're doing? Yeah,
so much like investing into real estate at the moment with the gig economy, almost we start talking about these things like they're markets. And that's a really easy way for me to kind of put my finger on it is when I go to Mexico, I go to the Mercado, I can go to the Mercado, right, and get cafe, I can see some artwork, there might even be a mariachi there. So again, very similar to kind of how these things are taking place here now in Denver, throughout the United States and throughout the world, to be honest. These things obviously don't happen overnight. And you really gotta dig deep. You really gotta, start connecting with other people, and you really have to start building up a network where you start putting like egos kind of aside, and you offer up what you can offer up, whether that's a talent to paint a wall, whether that's a chef coming in to cook a really good meal, a barista to be highlighted that way. But oh my gosh, I'm kind of going on a tangent here. I'll have you bring me back in a little bit more.
So I just wanted to, for people here who are listening in, to hear about how you're building community. I know you, and you build community through the incredible murals that you do. And right now you're doing—
Reminder to speak up.
You're doing one in Fort Collins.
Yeah. And
being a Latino working in Fort Collins, the imagery that you're putting in the mural, the symbols, how does that create more community about in your work?
Correct. So my attempt is just to be able to highlight who I am and seeing if I have any parallels with anybody else in the community, right? I think so often, and we live in a super diverse community here in Colorado, and it changes from city to city, town to town. So for me, it's just to be as authentic that I can to myself, to build off of personal experiences and see how I can find some parallels and some connections within that space that I'm going into, so that then those people feel like it's theirs and not that it's mine and that I placed it upon them, if that makes sense. So a lot of it is connecting with the dishwasher, the custodian, the building manager. So just like I might have a really fantastic conversation with the CEO, it's also, if somebody's taking out the trash on my way in as I'm dropping paints off to paint the mural, to really have a conversation with them, to ask questions with them about what they think about the design that I'm bringing, if they have any questions on it. Because whether we like it or not, through that full spectrum, right? Like the plumber to the CEO, there's different points of views, and it's just as important for that plumber, gardener, or the building manager to have input and to have just as much ownership within some of those ideas. So for me, it's really just engaging with anybody that comes up and asks questions. And that's the beautiful thing about public art and things that are open for the public, such as a coffee shop or live music, is that you get an opportunity to engage with your audience or your community and get immediate feedback. And going back to building projects, placemaking, there has to be a ton of that trust from whoever's hiring you or bringing you in to know that you're gonna go in kind of in an organic flow or state of mind to allow some of those things to happen serendipity and influence the work that you are doing.
And thinking about the creative economy in the state of Colorado and your role as a Latino artist, would you say that artists of color, that they have, that there's true points of access, true points of inclusion in the creative economy in the state of Colorado, or do we have a far way to go?
I think it's both. I think that there's a tug of war. With growth, there's, you know, like our bones are just as a human growing, you'll have these growing pains, right? So just like there's an attempt to have more inclusion, there's also, things are going so fast that even the markets, the creative sectors, the museums, the events that are happening are learning as they're going. So it's about being patient. It's about going as fast as you can, like paint as much as you can, sing as much as you can, record that album, put out the single, but also being super patient in knowing that there will be hiccups, that there will be, that you will fall down, that people will fall down in front of you, and that you'll have to maybe pick them up or they'll pick you up. So we're all learning, and I think we're all trying our best to have inclusion, to have access. It's just the world is moving so fast right now through the internet, through placemaking, that we are kind of making it up as we go. You know, I think what's holding us back the most, and I started giggling here a little bit when Jason was talking about it, is the ideas of rules and regulations, right? That I think in the past, if you knew the building owner, he'd be like, oh yeah, you know what to do? Yeah, go and make that into a kitchen and, be successful and do what you gotta do. And at this point, and it is for good reason, because we want to go into a restaurant and make sure that there's not like cockroaches or rats running around, like things gotta be up to code and fire and for safety and everything like that. But I do think that we have to find a better way to get some of those rules and regulations moving just a little bit faster. I don't have the answer for it, but I know that the world's moving fast and we have ideas and we have creativity that needs to get out, and we need to make better use of space, that sometimes some of those things just don't move as fast as we'd like them to.
So my next question, Armando, that I just thought about is, why is it important for you that your culture, your identity, be represented
For sure.
in this new gig economy?
For sure. I'll talk about my culture, my experience, but I also talk about just culture in general. I think we sometimes kind of wait around, right? And when I say we, I'm just saying, like, I'm talking about the collective human experience or nature, that we wait for like a Starbucks to pop up to feel like we're official. Sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes it feels that way, right? Like if the Starbucks is around the corner, it feels like it's safe for me to go there. It feels like something that I know and I'm familiar with, and I can finally now go say hello to Betty, who has the earring shop next door. And it should be the other way around. We should embrace the earring shop first. And I think we're doing a really good job of it. Again, this is kind of hypothetical and not all 100%. But we have to do a better job of embracing our own culture, no matter where we're at, because culture is constantly evolving and becoming something new. And we have to be able to kind of, I talk about like this tug of war, right? Like that you're pulling this way, trying to go further that way into the future, but you're also pulling from tradition, experience, and who you are. Everything from being Denver, from being Colorado, from being in the Americas to this side of the globe. We have to do a better job of holding on to traditions and pushing them forward, and not wait for something else or a bigger entity to tell us that we're official in that way. And I think Jason's probably has a hard time juggling some of those things, but it's probably doing it better than anybody else at this point. For me, it's super important that I get an opportunity because I exist. I live here. There's a lot of people that are in our community that do a ton of work to make sure that things, you know, that bread shows up on the table, that the sign gets hung up, that that the roads are as clean as they can be, that, you know, that people are getting healthy. And a lot of these people have different backgrounds, different cultures, and it's important that those things are represented so that they can, one, so we can keep growing our economy, right? So that we have a dollar in our pocket. But two, so that they feel represented and respected enough to come back and engage with you again. So from a business standpoint, but also from a human respect standpoint, it's super, super important. So for me, it is important. And I think, you know, we're not doing ourselves justice by not engaging with that, because it's a missed opportunity from a business standpoint, but it's a missed opportunity from a growth standpoint and a human standpoint.
And as you think about your role here, Armando, and you think about how you're able to embrace being a Latino in Colorado, as you look to the work going forward, what are you most excited about in your role in this new gig economy, in the creative space? What excites you? What are you looking forward to?
Selfishly, I'm just excited to be here, to be honest. Like, this is a really amazing step to hear some of the things that are being talked about, to know that there are people, not me specifically, but looking out for people like me that are, and sometimes it's like, well, this is what we have to play with, right? Sometimes you look at your ingredients, at your at your tools that you actually have to work with, and I appreciate that there are people opening doors up that way for me to play, to create, to ask bigger questions for myself, for my family, for my community, for painters, for muralists, for Latinos, for anything that I can represent moving forward. I get excited at the fact that the world is starting to kind of mold and become more water in a way where I can kind of plug in and then plug out as I need to, and not need to because like these are my needs, but as I need to so that I can evolve and so that we can evolve and bring something greater to the table, and hopefully allow for either the next generation or maybe somebody that's about to change careers or paths in order for them to find entry points with less friction. I don't want to say easier, but just less friction and more adaptable to where we are in today's society. That gets me really, really excited. The fact that we have access, like legit access, right, through whether it's Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, to other ideas, I think that's really exciting. Now, how do we implement some of those things, and how do we make them more accessible and grow from it? So the idea of this being new, of almost feeling like you're being born again, through COVID, through commercial real estate kind of morphing, and also more diversity and inclusion being part of the story and like a thread within the work that we are all. And I keep coming back to attempting, because not everything is a success and some things fail, and it's okay for those things to be at the forefront and for you to kind of have those scars, right? And sometimes you're still bleeding from the thing that you failed from while you're moving on to try something else. And we are quick at the moment to be like, you sucked, you failed. I don't know, that we all do. We do it on an everyday basis. And so we have to be okay with that and gotta wear our badges and be able to kind of rekindle relationships, come back and say, be honest and be like, I know it wasn't the best, but if we try this, and it's happening within organizations, within brands. And I'm just excited to participate, to see it as a fan of it, to see others rise up, and to also see others fall down, which I think is a lot of what's happening at the moment, is we get super attached to like, don't take my, I don't know, whatever company, you know, insert name here. You're like, well, when JCPenney comes down, like another thing will come up, and that's exciting. And as humans, we should be excited and we should cheer and root for that we might learn something new, that we might, you know, taste a new weird CBD coffee or something, or that we, you know what I mean? Or that we might get a new mural on our wall, and it's okay for turnover to happen. And that's how we stay on our toes. That's how we evolve. And that's how we get better.
Yeah, no, thank you. I think we might have a few questions. Brian or Castle from those listening in. Are there any questions before we continue?
I have a question. So, you know, I think themes through Startup Week, we're hearing a lot about fear, which you just kind of addressed there, right? And kind of the ability to lean into the fear and to keep trying while you still may be bleeding, right?
Yeah.
And I think then that kind of ties in with the first panel, right? Like just trying things and then the ability to right size your space to your venture. Now, I also kind of think to like kind of talk about that, a lot of those spaces that were discussed earlier were hybrids, like it's the art gallery plus the event center plus, you know, the coffee shop. So as it relates to your career of like being an artist, like what kind of hybridity do you think really kind of manifests within yourself to be able to do the work that you do?
I love this. And I don't know if this will answer your question specifically, but what comes to mind is I often find myself expressing my ideas in ways that are not art related, if that makes sense. So I'll tend to talk about soup a lot when I talk about my artwork and the ingredients and the feeling you get when grandma made soup and how we all know what that feeling is. And so I'll laugh at myself all the time because I'll have artists come up to me like, where's your cadmium yellow? And I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, so I often tend to distress and take apart the art world and the facade of it being like this thing and labels and terms that put it over here. And I make it more available. So I talk about like tacos all the time. I talk about having a drink. I talk about a conversation and how a conversation feels. And so for me, it's very important to to humanize the work and not make it an object, not make it a thing that's unattainable. I like to have conversations with people that feel very familiar or ask questions or kind of strip it down to a very primal state so that we can connect and so that hopefully I gauge my ideas and I'm able to understand to see if I'm on the correct path or if that was not the right thing at all. I don't know if that makes sense or not, but I try not to talk about things as if people already know what I'm going to be talking about when it comes to art. You know, I try to kind of make it more open than that.
Yeah, I mean, I love that. I think, you know, it just also kind of like there's a lot of freedom, right? And the fact that you don't have to be just one thing. You're a blend of everything, right? And so whatever that blend is like uniquely yours. And I love really, I think like this idea as an artist, right? That you kind of have those blends, but then also with really kind of what Tim and Jason were talking about is that we have these blends of these spaces now becoming available to us where it doesn't have to just be the one thing, right? It can kind of evolve throughout the day. So with that, we do have a question from one of the attendees. So I will read it here. So to both presenters, while creating vibrancy and providing access to the communities you're engaging, how do you uplift and support the surrounding communities rather than displace them? That's question one. And then what role and responsibility do you each play in providing equity?
I'll answer really quick. Through the work that I'm doing, I try not to make the work that I'm doing. Let's just say Armando's known for painting sneakers, and he's going to paint sneakers on every mural that he does. But depending on where you live, maybe the sneaker is going to have a mountain, or if you go to, you know, Seattle, your sneaker is going to have an ocean on it. So it's not about the sneakers. So the work that I try to bring into the community is there isn't an idea. There isn't like a vessel, if I may, that's just going to be expressing what's already there. I wait to have a legit conversation with, even if it's just one person, or a board, or a whole gym full of people, you know, which sounds weird at this moment. I wait to have those conversations to see what we start with that, what that seed is before I end up planting any ideas or any thoughts of what that mural, what that painting, what that collaboration, what that creative direction is going to look like. So I try to, as much as I can, because we all have our bias and our own ideas and where we're coming from, but as much as I can, I try to lean into those projects with an open mind without having that initial seed to plant it. And I try to kind of nurture and plant some of those things with a community, with a team, or with a partner that's connecting me to that space to start off.
Yeah, and I think, Armando, obviously in all of your work, the support of the communities, of you interacting with them, of you including them in your work, in everything you do, has always been at the forefront of what you do. I think the question about preventing displacement is a good one. So I was going to ask Jason to come and.
Sure, quick switch. Yeah, so it's interesting. I mean, my thesis on this is we will prevent displacement when you can actually layer use, and that comes from collaboration. And if you could say from a landlord's perspective, your revenue is going to be the same regardless. Wouldn't you rather layer together an artist that's showing here and a front of house that actually turns into a workspace, and the back of house of a restaurant that turns into a commissary kitchen? If it's all the same to you from a revenue standpoint, you're not going to be perpetually seeking the long-term tenant if you have a space that remains vibrant and remains, that revenue positive. So I think the potential here is to layer use to continue not to displace and have people chasing something that's more affordable and more affordable. So hopefully, as you almost look at like from a residential use, sometimes you need roommates to make sure that you get to stay in the neighborhood you want. So hopefully that connects community and that allows people to stay in place versus kind of trying to chase the next neighborhood.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you. Brian or Castle, is there any other questions?
Boy, there is, but I think we're going to have to wrap up since it's 10:59. But I wanted to piggyback on what everyone was talking about there in terms of really just equity and community building. We'll be having a panel that is going to do a deep dive on this discussion at 1 p.m. It is racial equity and impact investing in the creative economy. And it's a great lineup. So I suggest everyone interested in this subject to please join us at 1 p.m. And Castle and I would like to thank everyone for the amazing job. Thank you so much for being a part of Startup Week 2020. And we couldn't do it without you. Thank you for being a part of it.
Thank you, Brian.
Thanks,
Thank you,
guys.
Castle.
Thanks, Brian.
Yeah.
Thanks,
Bye.
everyone.
Bye, guys. I'll run over to do that for you. Give a check first.
Awesome, guys.
Things were said.